Hello and welcome. Tonight we have two fictional stories that are not written by Lady Night Terror. I am grateful to both authors for their permission to read them. Listeners, I hope you enjoy the stories as much as I did. Story 1, Shadow Stalker Unmasked by Just Engine 05. Detective Sarah Collins sat alone in her dimly lit office, staring at the files scattered across her desk. The case of the Shadow Stalker had consumed her for months, leaving her exhausted and haunted by the gruesome crimes. The city was paralyzed with fear as the unknown killer continued to claim innocent lives, leaving behind nothing but a chilling calling card, a black rose. As Sarah combed through the evidence once again, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a shiver down her spine. She glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight. Reluctantly, she decided to call it a night, hoping that a fresh perspective in the morning would bring her closer to catching the elusive murderer. Just as she reached for her coat, the phone on her desk rang ominously, startling her. She hesitated before answering, knowing that this call could be the break she had been waiting for. "Detective Collins," she answered, her voice filled with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. A distorted voice on the other end whispered, "The Shadow Stalker strikes tonight. You have until dawn to save them." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of the cryptic message. Who was this caller? Did they know something about the killer? Determined not to let fear overcome her, Sarah quickly gathered her things and rushed to the address the voice had provided. As she arrived at the location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a heavy fog blanketed the area, further obscuring her path. The atmosphere was eerily silent, broken only by the distant hooting of an owl. Sarah tightened her grip on her gun and cautiously entered the derelict building. The faint glow of a single light bulb illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As she ventured deeper into the labyrinth corridors, she stumbled upon a macabre sight. A lifeless body, bearing the unmistakable signature of the Shadow Stalker, lay sprawled before her, blood pooling around it. The killer had struck again. Sarah's mind raced with a mix of determination and fear. She knew time was running out. She had to find the killer and end this nightmare once and for all. She pressed on, following the trail of black roses left as a cruel taunt. As she descended into the heart of the warehouse, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around her. The sound of her footsteps echoed ominously, intensifying the sense of dread that consumed her. Suddenly, a trap door creaked open beneath her, and Sarah plummeted into the darkness. Pain shot through her leg as she landed on a hard, unforgiving surface. The fall had incapacitated her, leaving her vulnerable to the very predator she sought to apprehend. Frantically, Sarah reached for her flashlight and cast its beam around the room. Her blood turned to ice as she realized the truth. She had fallen into the lair of the Shadow Stalker. The walls were adorned with disturbing photos of his victims, their terrified faces etched into her memory forever. In the distance, a low, sinister chuckle resonated through the chamber. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, wielding a gleaming knife, a grotesque embodiment of evil. The killer's eyes glowed with sadistic pleasure as he approached Sarah, relishing in the fear that emanated from her. but Sarah refused to succumb to terror. Summoning every ounce of courage, she reached for her gun and fired, the bullet finding its mark. The shadow stalker staggered backwards, a look of shock and disbelief on his face before collapsing to the ground. Breathing heavily, Sarah knew that the nightmare was finally over. The city. The end. Story 2. My little brother's death was totally devastating. By El Cudo 95. Author's disclaimer. Nothing in this story is real, an exception of the dead brother. The story is made up completely by me, El Cudo 95. My brother died the previous year. His name was William, or Will. He was almost 14 when he died. I was 16 back then, in a car crash with a taxi. I had warned him not to take a taxi to come home and call me to drive him back. Instead, he was too stubborn to listen. That was Will. You can't say he was problematic. He was simply disobedient, mostly to me. But who obeys their sister in the first place? Will was the adventurous type, and he didn't used to obey me mostly because he was all in favor of the brother protects the sister no matter the age. He would always tease me, prank me, even hit me sometimes. But just like any other sibling, he would see red every time he heard that someone annoyed me at school. And trust me, I've always been bullied at school, this or that way, mostly by a certain group of girls, Sally, Tracy, and Lily. Will would always get in trouble at school for insulting and hitting these girls. In other words, he was overprotective of me. I know that this information seems totally useless, but it's important for the rest. My parents couldn't handle his death, and without them wanting to, they would constantly avoid me. I mean, I needed some time to recover as well. The middle school he used to go to was the same building as my school, so literally everyone knew about his death. The bad thing was, Sally, Tracy, and Lily did as well. Their teasing was brought to a brand new level. They would constantly throw water balloons at me, no matter what the weather was like. They would laugh at me saying, "Come on, Jenny, why don't you call your brother to take us out instead of you?" That was when I stopped going to school for a while. I was fed up of coming back from school in tears, soaking wet because of a bunch of idiots. I couldn't inform my parents, they would totally ignore me. We barely even said good morning to each other. The day after, the three had realized that I had no intention of going to school anymore until they were punished. They started sending me threatening messages from various accounts on social media. I couldn't avoid them. They even started posting embarrassing things about me and constantly tagged me on them. I was in total despair. I was even afraid of going outside for a minute. A month later, one of them, Sally, stopped posting this stuff. She literally disappeared. The police found her in an outskirts river a couple of hours later. Only her body, to be exact. Her head was impaled on the top of a tree in the forest, some miles away from her body. I couldn't sleep that night. I was sure that something was going wrong. I felt like someone was watching me out of the window. When I got the courage to raise my head and look outside, I started feeling dizzy. I lost sight for a couple of seconds, but I swear I saw a figure waving at me. I shook my head. Then I heard Will's room's door slam loudly. I was surprised to see my parents sleeping in their room. I thought that could be a robber, so I quietly called the police and woke my parents up. The police had investigated everything and reassured us that no one was in the house except us. I was shocked to hear that every door was open. I was ready to ask whether Will's room's door was open, but then I stopped and thought it was just my imagination. I managed to fall asleep somehow, but I had that sickened feeling of someone watching me. Again. At dawn, we heard the fire brigade pass. Turned out Tracy's house had been on fire. She was found burnt to the bone in her room. It was the centerfold of the fire. Another burnt body was found in the living room. It was Lily. The police asked the parents whether the two girls were having a sleepover, but they did not. The families ended up suing each other. I left the place. I simply couldn't hear or watch them any longer. I visited Will's grave. I stared at the ground and said audibly, "Looks like those three aren't going to annoy me again." My heart stopped when I heard Will's distorted voice from the ground. "I know." Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the stories, please hit that like button and subscribe. And thanks again to the authors.